Steve, welcome. We didn't have a traditional VT introduction there, but we got the three gentlemen with you, C2FO representatives and AngloGold Ashanti. I'll hand over to Steve for another great discussion. Over to you, my friend.
Thank you very much, Ian. Yeah, I mean, it's, we don't need to be traditional, right? It's ESG Day. It's about being progressive. It's about forward thinking. So I'm very happy to kind of bring together this wonderful panel to have that discussion. I love an insights from the ecosystem session. It really allows us to get into some of those progressive topics, to find out what's going on the ground, and to also learn a little bit around what some of our partners are thinking and how they can help move these conversations forward. Particularly, I want to focus on this idea of the triple bottom line, so people, profit, and planet. We've heard a lot about how organizations, within procurement, how they're thinking about moving forward with the sustainability initiatives, but how are they thinking about integrating that into the business operations and the cost involved there, and how they're matching that with finance ambitions. So it's important stuff, and it really, hopefully we can take away something from today. Before I bring in the wonderful Adam Weiswasser from AngloGold Ashanti and Colin Sharp from C2FO, great panel that we have there. Before I bring them in, I will just remind you, if you have questions, do put those into the chat box. We'll hopefully get a chance to pick those up later in the session. We're very keen to hear from you guys, so please don't be shy. Let's hear from you. But let's bring in our great panel. Colin, hello, sir. Welcome to the session. I think it's important, just before we kick things off, just to give an idea of, who are C2FO? Maybe you can share for those who aren't already familiar.
Thanks, Steve, and thank you for the invite onto the panel today. So I am sure C2FO needs no introduction. We've been a regular at these events for many, many years, won a number of awards through Procurement Leaders. Hopefully we'll be in for another one this evening. So, but just for those that don't know C2FO, let me describe us as a fintech who's been providing supply chain finance, for want of a better word, what we call dynamic supplier finance to all sections of supply chains. So unlike some of the more bank-based programs, which tend to focus on big suppliers and terms extensions, we do it for everybody throughout the supply chain. So you can drive working capital, you can drive margin improvement, really, really importantly, and the topic of today, how you link that finance, that topic of inclusive finance, to be able to drive your sustainability or ESG agendas.
Thank you very much, Colin. So, Adam, welcome to the panel. I'm going to bring you in now. So, obviously, AngloGold Ashanti, a major gold mining organisation, and I think what would be really interesting, given as Colin set us up nicely there, how is procurement bringing suppliers along on that ESG journey?
Yeah, no, thanks, guys. I think for what it's worth, for folks that may not be familiar with AngloGold Ashanti, we're the third largest gold miner in the world, headquartered in Johannesburg, South Africa. We've got operations on 4 continents, and in many ways, we operate in a lot of developing countries. And so the ESG principles that we're going to talk about today are really critical around how we can help economies and communities around the world. And I think, just to jump into your question, how we're bringing suppliers along, I think it starts with just recognizing that procurement plays a critical role. In many ways, we're interacting with host communities and countries, and perhaps oftentimes being that first point of integration or with external parties, suppliers, et cetera. And to me, we've got the potential. You talk triple bottom line. I sometimes use the term multiplier effect. But we've got, if you use the right approach, I think there's the potential for procurement to drive a multiplier effect that can broadly and positively impact local economies while also meeting shareholder requirements. And as people have talked about it, it's increasingly moving up the shareholder agenda, both in the capital markets, the stock markets, et cetera. And so what we're really trying to do is work with suppliers to unlock financing, and even in today's case around COVID-19, help to lift them a bit so that they can maintain their current staffing levels and maintain their business continuity through COVID-19. Because I think it's really important to make sure that we play our part in ensuring they're there for the long term with us.
I want to come back to you on that point, because I think it's crucial about how you're supporting your suppliers. There's a story to be told there. Colin, though, I want to bring you in here. Adam pointed out that procurement, can be that driver for change within an organisation. Can you give us a bit of an idea, as you see it, what levers does the function have to do that? How are they using them effectively? What do you think?
So, if we look at the topic of ESG, sustainability, however you categorize it, something like there's lots and lots of studies around, something like 80% of the the ESG impact lies outside of the corporation and in the supply chain, and therefore procurement has a pivotal role to play in working with suppliers and using the levers that I'll talk about in a second. I think it's also a point in time where we can use that as professionals to drive the impact into the boardroom of ESG. ESG has become a key topic, whether we like it or not, we're getting ratings, just like we have financial ratings on us. As corporates, we're getting ESG ratings now, and those ESG ratings have a long-term impact on the viability of the company, therefore the share price and the ability to access capital. So it's become really, really important in the boardroom. So procurement now being able to work with suppliers to drive this agenda on behalf of the board. And what I'll talk about during the course of this session is our ability to use financing. If you think about the needs of a supplier to make a change, whether that's in their working practices, whether that's in carbon reduction, or whatever your theme or your topic of ESG is, we're asking often a supplier, sometimes a small supplier, to make a change in state. And that often takes working capital. It takes money to do that. So what we've been doing is increasingly working with procurement professionals through our programs to push lower cost financing down through the supply chain to allow them to, hit two goals. Goal one is to reduce purchasing costs by providing lower cost financing for the supplier. Secondly is then linking to their ESG status. If we have a scorecard or something else on suppliers, we can take that score and we can provide different rates. So some things we're working on at the moment with different programs. Think about perhaps a red, amber, green status on your supplier scorecard, where red's not very good and green's excelling in that ESG performance. If I can show you how you can move from red through to green and get much cheaper financing, it's a perpetual and persistent incentive for suppliers to motivate them and help them with the working capital, ultimately cost reduction, to meet those goals.
And I want to pick up on a point that, so Adam referred to this earlier, but we're talking about bringing suppliers along with us, right? And, I hosted a session with P&G before the break where they were talking about, bringing smaller suppliers and how you can reach those. And Adam, when we think about, those who often need the financial support, often because they're smaller suppliers, how is an organisation like Gold Ashanti supporting those SMEs, those ESG goals?
No, look, I think for us, it's something I'm very proud to say that AngloGold Ashanti is really focused on what we call SMMEs, small, medium, and micro enterprise suppliers. And really our focus has been around how do we build capacity and skills transfer that allows them to lift their business over time. And really one of our values has always been around the fact that we want to leave communities and societies better off for AngloGold Ashanti of having been there. And I think with that, where I'm really focused specifically on the fact that procurement can unlock opportunities to drive social change positively where we operate. And so to me, one of the things that we're really trying to work closely on is, one, making sure that we've identified where our local or SMME suppliers are so we can ascertain where the greatest opportunities are to drive value. And then two, when we get into that, I think ultimately it comes down to, okay, one, is there access to capital, which can be challenging for suppliers, especially, again, even in the current environment against the backdrop of a more broader challenge. But to me, one of the things is that we've really tried to work closely with them to say, okay, what's their plan, not just environmentally, but socially? How does that align with our strategy? And I think it really starts with strategy. And then you build a framework for how you can work and develop together. And so when I look at, kind of how to get started in this area, it really kind of comes back to strategy, is moving ESG up the strategic curve to being a high priority item and moving beyond what I would call traditionally a compliance culture and taking a leadership role in that space. Because if you're simply just saying, how do we make sure that we achieve the lowest common denominator, then are you genuinely driving the narrative forward? You really need to orient your strategy and then your action planning, both internally and with your suppliers around that.
Thanks for that response there, Adam. I'm just stepping in there. He's at a moment with Steve's connection. Colin, if you wouldn't mind just taking up and developing on the point there from Adam, and just kind of continuing us in the current flow.
Yeah, so around the topic of, I guess, SMEs, one of the, I couldn't agree more with Adam on the point around supporting SMEs rather than this being about a compliance issue. So, that involves two things. One is, how do we make it easy for a small supplier to be able to answer all the surveys and scorecards and various things that we need them to do? How do we make that easy? And then secondly, how do we make sure that they have the access to the finance that we discussed before? And I think COVID, obviously we talk a lot these days about COVID, but it's put a big spotlight on the inability for small, medium, minority-owned businesses to access that capital. During COVID, the capital markets have dried up. It's much harder to get credit. And so we've been advising governments on the topic. We've been working with with many of our clients to first of all identify who SMEs are. So I'm sure Adam will testify. It's hard within your ERP system. You don't necessarily always have a flag that says, "Hey, I'm an SME." So we've been with with organisations to help them identify and in some cases certify the type of supplier, whether it's a small medium enterprise or whether it's a minority owned or other type of organisation that they want to support. So then we've got the baseline through which we can support them, and then in doing that, accessing capital and being able to find ultra low sources of capital to pump through into those SMEs. And we've had some great examples. One of the world's biggest retailers, I just checked before the conference started. Before the year is out, we'll have pumped almost $1 billion worth of funding through that channel to various SMEs around the world to support their businesses. Topical again with COVID and SMEs, we're working with, as another example of some real life cases of how this can help. Identifying suppliers within the supply chain of one of the world's biggest medical device companies to be able to find those that could help them with ventilator production, and then again fund the working capital requirements of that expansion of growth through the provision of working capital through the platform. And then I guess the final one was trying to find capital outside of traditional banking sources to push down into the supply chains. Working with, for example, one of the world's biggest car companies on their Kickstart or Restart program, because they all need working capital to get themselves going. So those are the kind of things that we've been doing, and I think that ability to identify, certify, and then push the capital needed down through the supply chain is a critical element.
Thanks, Colin. We still no Steve, so you've got me. I can only apologise. Thankfully, I'm prepared to still step in with these, having joined the calls with you guys. But there's some common challenges that we've all encountered over the years. Having quality of data on supplier performance is certainly one of those. How are you able to kind of push for cost and savings at a time really when asking for higher ESG standards and investment has been a struggle for us all to do? Adam, just from your perspective, please.
Yeah, no, I think like a lot of businesses, we've struggled with that in the past as well. Is this what I would call perceived trade-off between ESG and cost? And so in my mind, it first starts with saying, you got to ask yourself a simple question, which is, what's it going to cost us to not fully support the company's sustainability goals? So don't look at just pricing on a widget. What's the broader cost socially, economically back to a business versus looking at it in a finite space or a confined space? The other thing is, I think unlocking data starts with also saying, what is it you're solving for? So what is it you're trying to achieve and working back from there? And I think in our case, really a lot of our learning came from working more closely with our sustainability teams to align our goals and objectives so we get that fiscal impact we're looking for around business support and financial elements in procurement with some of the broader sustainability goals. But to me, I think the access to data piece is key. And I'm sure Colin's got some great points here, is that, being able to, one, align all your systems globally to have a cohesive view of what your data and metrics look like at an underlying level so you can inform some decision making is really key. And then I also think what we've learned a lot over the last 12 to 24 months is how to better use the resources around us, whether that's the OECD, World Bank, or other large organizations that might have benchmark data or information available. And the other piece that I would push, and Procurement Leaders is a great example, is industry groups. So where are there industry groups or forums or platforms you can go to benchmark and share information across businesses that are likely to have the same challenges you have today? So the way I would characterize it is use all the resources you can and bring them to bear to drive home some sustainable good.
Fantastic. Colin, we've got Steve back now, and Steve will jump back in a moment just to carry on the conversation. But Colin, just from your perspective as well, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, for sure. If you look at there is a dilemma. If we're driving towards ESG, does it make the process more expensive? Does it make the product more expensive? Let's take the thing that we've been talking about, which is financing the supply chain. Lots of studies show that for many companies, that's an expensive, an expensive component of the end product. Can be as much as 20% of the end product is the built-up underlying financing cost. For many companies, we see there's a hidden cost and a hidden risk in the supply chain of financing, because companies, particularly the smaller ones, as we discussed before, are out there financing themselves at expensive rates. That has to come back to you as a cost on their cost of goods. If we can pump cheaper liquidity and get that to all of those that need it, we've reduced their financing costs, and in turn we've reduced yours. If we can then use that to drive incentives and behaviours and even working capital needs to adopt sustainability ESG tactics, then we achieve the balance of both of those goals.
Okay, Ian, I'm going to jump in if that's okay and say very sorry for my internet completely falling over mid-session, and thanks to you for picking up and asking the guys the questions. It's been wonderful to have the chance to work with C2FO. I'm afraid I didn't get the chance to ask them the questions, but it was hopefully you guys covered a lot of interesting ground and heard a little bit about the story of what's been going on with AngloGold Ashanti, how they've been approaching that, and how C2FO support their organisations that they work with. Again, apologies for the technical disruption, and hopefully you found it to be an engaging session. And please do, feel free to follow up with Colin or Adam. I'm sure they would love to hear from you if you had further questions. Ian, having had a very brief stint in the spotlight, I'm going to hand back to you.